Hi everyone, welcome to the weekly briefing, the last weekly briefing of lockdown, but it won't be the last weekly briefing in this format. I think it's had a really good take up on YouTube, so we intend to continue with this kind of briefing even after the children come back, but for now the last one during our lockdown phase. So one item really for next week is the return, and just going through some key points, some key reminders about the return. What we've decided to do is to keep everything as close to what we had before as possible. What the children need is routine, what you guys need is the return to routine, so that's what we're going to do. We're working on the basis that the children were safe before and it worked safely before, and from there we will continue to pursue that line as a result. So we've got a number of little steps I want to take you through so you're very clear on what is needed, what you need to do when you come back. They're also in the written weekly news that's coming out today. Okay, but as I say, we've kept them as close as we can to what we had before. It is important to stay, and I'm going to refer to my notes for this one if that's okay, that in all cases we're following government and local authority health advice. The government perceives schools to be safe enough. We have to trust them. It's important to get our children back and back to learning. And there's an important distinction there between getting children back in school and actually getting them learning effectively. And as you'll see with the look round that I'm going to film tomorrow, we're designing for effective learning, not just getting the children back. As the media would say, get them back. There's actually a difference between getting them in a building and get them effective learning, and I'll talk more about that tomorrow. But yeah, the government perceives school to be safe enough to open. We all have our own views on that, whether it is or it isn't, but we'll be open from Monday. And we followed their advice. We've been given a document once again about think about this, think about that, if possible do this, think about that, if you can do X, can you do Y? We also get advice from LCC about what's reasonable to do as well, and we follow that. At no time am I or any of my staff experts in coronavirus. We follow the guidance. We're not privy to the science. The government will not share the science with the profession. So we have to trust what they're telling us, and we move on from there. So sometimes if I have questions about, is this safe? Is that safe? I know as much as you know about it. We're just trying to do our best to reduce transmission, and as much as possible attempt to control any spread of the virus within school. And that's really as far as I can say. Beyond that is probably a question for your MPs and politicians to take up. But we're open, we're ready, and we're prepared, and that's the key. So here are some key messages from Monday 8th of March that we'll be putting into place. And what I should say is the intention is to keep things as consistent as we can all the way through to Friday the 16th of July. But there might be some of these elements that we can change and adapt as time moves on. The transmission in the community will affect the elements that I'm going to describe here. So it's an ever-changing scene, but I will try and keep it as consistent as I can. Here are the notes. So class bubbles will be used initially, like we had before, and the playground is going to be divided into year collection zones just like it was before. So we're cutting down on parental mixing, and then we have the class bubbles within school itself. That's exactly as we had before, and the children have their breaks and their lunch times in their class bubbles. Not ideal, but the right first thing to do. Transmission is still, I would say, pretty high, even though it's reducing. There are still high levels of infection across the country, and there's still high numbers in hospital. Therefore, at the moment, we need to be, I think, particularly vigilant in terms of bubbles within school. We're going to attempt the usual morning staggered drop-off. That worked really well. People were choosing a gap to come in, and it worked quite nicely as a drop-off walk-through system. Mornings had worked really well. There is a slight change. We'll still be opening at 8:35, but we're not going to give 30 minutes. We're going to say 8:55 is the time when you need to be here by. 8:35 to 8:55. The reason being is that 97% of parents and families were here for 8:55, and there was only the odd one after that. It was making no difference, and we need to make sure we've got that sharp, prompt start. So it's 8:35 to 8:55. If it's after 8:55, just as it would have been in normal times, it's late. Okay, so please make sure you're here for 8:55. Okay. Collection again is as we had before. It doesn't work as well at tea time because you've got a one point of collection, if you like. Now, if I really staggered it, it would be a very long collection time. I think you'd have to collect, go back to a car or go back home and come back, or stamp for very long periods of time waiting. So doing it as we do in a sort of 20-minute window using the zones is about as effective as we can. And I have to thank so many of you for adhering to the bubble and collection elements, and also leaving site and entering site with due respect for others. So we're going to do that again. I would just ask those few that don't stand in bubbles to make sure you stand in your bubble, please, and collect your children in due course. And it says on the newsletter, EYFS will be the first ones out at 2:55, and then we're going to try and roll up from there. It isn't always an exact science. You can't get human beings every day to be bang on a second. But our attempt is to 2:55, early years pick up, 3 o'clock, year 1 and year 2, 3:05, year 3 and year 4, and then 3:10, year 5 and year 6. And then with time up to 4:15 for those that are still waiting to be collected. That's the ideal, and in a perfect world it will work perfectly. I can't think of a better solution without causing huge inconvenience to parents, with long waits and almost like having to come back and make a second visit. It's the best way to do it efficiently, and with your support and help outdoors, we can make it work again. And as ever, we'll have a look and we'll tweak what we need to. I tweaked the zone sizes and the positions a few times. I tweaked certain little formats here and there, and we'll continue to do that. So watch out for the cones and the bubbles. So in that sense, you're coming back to pretty much a normal routine, which I think is useful and effective. So I'll keep referring to my notes as I go through because there's a few points to look at. We're not allowed to authorise absence if people choose not to bring their child back. School is open and it will be an unauthorised absence, and the local authority may wish to follow that up and pursue that. That is just a fact. It is what it is. We can't authorise absences due to people electing not to return around issues of COVID. School is as safe as it's going to be, I think, for the time ahead, and we're going to have to learn to live with the threat of COVID and the coronavirus out there. So I think we just have to get back. We have to get back, and we have to try and get to some normality. And I think it is right that the stance is that it's unauthorised if people elect not to return, and it will be something that the LCC will follow up and check in our records. It won't be us personally, but it will be them. Next one, uniform is exactly as normal, and you continue to need to bring full clean water bottles from home every day. We haven't got that facility for individuals moving around school and filling up water bottles at this point. It might come back, we hope it will. At the moment, we want you to continue bringing that in. But it doesn't mean you bring juice in from home. It's got to be water. Okay, it can't be orange juice, blackcurrant juice or anything else. It needs to be water. Okay, thank you. Other little bits and pieces, homeschool reading books. We were unsure last time about transmission and what to do, but we've had a look into it and we feel as though we can operate that safely as it normally would be. Taking the homeschool book home every day and the Never Ending Stories book and bringing them back each day. We can safely manage it within school whereby it's just the children touching them, and staff and other children can see things from a distance, so that will go in each day. Now when books are finished, they'll then go into a 3-day quarantine as is expected before they're then put back into circulation. So we think that can work well. Children can wear face masks brought from home, but as the guidance states, they're not required in primary school. I know from year 7 onwards it's different, but in primary school they're not required, they're not essential, and we're going to take the stance we took before, that children can wear them if families wish them to do so. But what we will say is that if the children are taking them on and off and messing with them and not using them correctly, then we will ask them to put them safely away because they're not being used for the purpose that's there. And potentially then if they're misused, they're more of a COVID threat to others than not having one at all, which is something we have to manage. So if a child expresses a wish to remove a mask. So they've been asked to wear it by yourselves, but then they're uncomfortable during the day, then we would follow the child's wishes at that time and let family know at the end of the day. You've asked them to wear the mask, but they're not comfortable with it, they're upset about it, so they've taken it off, and that'll be something for you to talk about with your children. It's essentially your call, that, and we will support that as much as we can. School lunches return as normal next week. We're straight in with the normal menu. No changes with that. It is as it was when we finished at Christmas. There continues to be no breakfast bar at this stage. We don't want to encourage lines, further opportunities for transmission. The bubble situation won't work, so that's not there at this stage. And we are working on different future options for elements of that to, I think, widen and look at the old breakfast bar idea from a different perspective in time, but it won't return at the moment. Children will be issued with their own stationery equipment as they have before. They'll have their own pencil case, and those will be refreshed this week and particularly tomorrow, being set up ready for the children's return. So they have their own stationery. Can I 100% of the time promise you they'll only touch their own pen or pencil? No, because they're all young children and sometimes they pick up the wrong thing. But we're doing everything we can to make sure they pick up the right things. The classroom settings are being revised again. They're exciting, the classroom settings. I want to show you those in the film tomorrow because they're a major part of our reopening. And it hasn't just been done because it's COVID safe. It fits in perfectly with our developing philosophy for learning. I'm going to take you through the tour tomorrow. It'll have two accents. It'll be, this is how we're creating the COVID safe environment, but this is how we're putting our vision forward in the class. And over the next few weeks, I'm going to do certain films on aspects of that vision in the classroom. It's very important to state, and I'm really passionate about this, that the children aren't just coming back into school to fill time, to enable people to go back to what they're doing. They're coming back to go to effective learning. And that's a very important message. And I want them to come into a room that's COVID safe, but a room that does not detract from their ability to learn as effectively as possible. And we've done an awful lot of work on that, and I'm excited to show you that tomorrow and in the coming weeks. So you'll see what our layout is, and I think it's quite an innovative response to the COVID safe environment and the needs of the returning learners as well. Staff are allowed to move between bubbles. That's been made very clear in the government documentation. They know full well we can't open a school unless adults can move between bubbles. That doesn't mean that they'll move needlessly between bubbles, but where necessary for class cover to enable lunchtime rotas, breaks, whatever it might be, PPA, they will move between a bubble. But staff know how to move between those bubbles. Without that, I couldn't open school. But that is something the government thankfully accepts and understands. It has been a bone of contention from teachers to government way back when we were saying actually teachers need to have manoeuvrability, otherwise you haven't got a school. I mean, look at secondary schools. They're always having different teachers, and that has to be the case. Next point, I'll refer to my notes. I mentioned about the children wearing masks. At this stage, staff will wear masks when moving indoors around school and when staff are gathering together. When they're in their class bubble scenarios, either in the cloakroom or in the classroom or in whatever room they're working in, they wouldn't wear their mask. It's when they're moving through school and making that general contact, in particular with other adults. And when they're outside on duties, obviously they wouldn't wear it at that time. So we're using it in a sensible way that follows reasonable guidance. Obviously teachers can't teach really with their mask on at the front of the room. Parents must not enter the building at any stage. We need you really to stay in your designated areas. That's really important. There is no entry to school for anybody other than the staff and anybody other than essential external visitors and the children themselves. The one area where you can come into school is via the main reception and talking through the glass panel there. We clearly hope that will change at some point. And just a point on that is that then if you want to approach a teacher at the end of the day, obviously you won't be able to talk to them in the morning, but if you want to approach a teacher at the end of the day or any adult at morning or the end of the day, we ask you do so with due respect to social distancing. That's really important. If you don't, I've instructed the staff to say, look, could you please take further steps back If anybody doesn't want to do that, I've instructed my staff not to talk to that parent at that time. It's important you respect that 2 metre distance when it's adult to adult. Very important point. Just on that, we're also asking parents to wear a face mask at the moment when they come onto site in the playground. We'll see how long we need to do that for, but right now, let's go with that. Please don't be the one that think it doesn't apply to you. Please wear the mask. It's very important, particularly at tea time collection. Please wear the mask, because I'll promise you, if you don't, 90% of people are looking around and thinking, why hasn't that person got a mask on? Please wear the mask and set the example that we need there. Thank you. I know it's inconvenient, but hopefully somewhere we'll be through that inconvenience. Next point. I mentioned the adults wearing face masks when we come in to the site of playground, but as I said, just on that point, that's something I'll review regularly and see. The moment I can make a reasonable change based upon the scientific guidance and government advice, I will do that. The remote learning offer, should a class bubble go down, then it will be very much like the offer we've got now. We may well develop that, and we're looking at moving what we've been doing on another stage. So if the whole bubble went down, there will be that remote learning offer inserted, and if individual children are required to isolate due to asymptomatic COVID or a link within the family, then there will be a learning offer for those children as well, although it clearly cannot be a full-on personalised day learning offer just for them. It will have to be an adapted version of what's going on in school, with teachers having various contacts. We'll share that with you in the coming days as we develop that. We have a number of ideas at the moment, and we really need to try a few more tests on the individual idea, so we'll be in touch regarding that. And the last thing to say for the moment, routine hand washing, sanitising, wiping, cleaning, that will all continue to happen as it has before. We have the sanitising stations in class and the class-based products and routines to do that. That doesn't change, and that's throughout the day, but it's managed by the adult in charge of that bubble. They will determine, we're coming in at this time, we need to do that. We're going out at that time, we need to do that. There's a movement there, we need to spray there. We're changing a table there, we need to do that. That has to be managed by the class teacher. Our school timetable is quite fluid for each class, and adults must be in charge of when those cleaning times need to happen. I can't say 10:15 you do that, because 10:15 is different for each class. It will be when that needs to happen based upon movement and higher risks of transmission. Okay, but generally entry and exit will always be a point at which we'll sanitise, but there will be other points as well when teachers determine movement requires it. So that's all there as it was before. I said there wasn't much, but there's quite a bit there, isn't there? There's loads of little details I could tell you about in terms of routines in school, but they're not essentially affecting your role within school at this point. So what I'm going to do with that is just put that film together tomorrow and tell you more about the philosophy for learning and as safe as possible learning in this climate. And that will be tomorrow, and that's in more detail. I think it's important that as we move forward, we accept two things. We must try and learn as normal, but equally we have to learn to live with the virus. The virus in some form is here to stay for a long period of time, and we have to make sure that Mayfield is delivering the effective learning that we want to deliver, is delivering the vision for learning that we want and the approach that we want, but is as COVID safe as we can be. And that's what I'm looking at, not for 14 weeks, but actually, if you like, for 3-4 years, because we really don't know what's to come in those years ahead, and we have to be as bulletproof in terms of learning and COVID safe as we can be. Okay, so there we go. Nothing is ever safe, and I'm certainly not putting guarantees there next week. But what I am putting there is our readiness to welcome our children back. The staff are ready to welcome children back. We are ready for that. We have been ready for that from January, and we want them back. We're desperate to see them back. But it just needs us all to play our common sense role in doing so, and offering due respect and tolerance for anything that you may think, oh, I don't like that, but understanding why we're having to do some things that actually we may not want as well. So I'll make my film for tomorrow. I think it'll be worth watching I'll continue to do those, and I'm going to use the Mayfield TV YouTube channel more and more to tell you the story of our school and what's going on in the absence of you being able to come on. I think it's really useful for you to do that. And there's one or two more initiatives that I want to introduce to you that will involve you more in the discussion and story of school, even though it's much more remote than it would normally be. So take care, and I will speak to you again via the film tomorrow, and then next week again via an updated briefing. And watch out for a printed version of this in our weekly news that's coming out today, in the usual social media and email forms and all the things that you pick up the messages by. Thank you for listening. See you later.